Yes?
I'm Leonard Hofstetter. I called you about the apartment. You said to come by.
I know what I said. I know what you said. I know what my mother said on March 5th, 1992. What is the sixth noble gas?
What?
You said you're a scientist. What is the sixth noble gas?
Radon?
Are you asking me or telling me?
Telling you? Telling you.
All right. Next question. Kirk or Picard?
Well, that's tricky. Original series over Next Generation, but Picard over Kirk.
Correct. You've passed the first barrier to roommatehood. You may enter.
Oh, this is pretty nice.
As Bones from Star Trek would say, sometimes Sheldon can be a real pointed-eared hobgoblin. For those of you who don't know, in this episode of The Big Bang Theory, Leonard is trying to find an apartment and, spoiler alert, becomes Sheldon's roommate. Though utterly bonkers, Sheldon is using a process he's worked through many times to identify if this roommate will be right for him. And the process he's meticulously following could be considered his standard work.
The bedrooms are back there?
That depends.
I don't understand. Their existence is conditional?
No, but your ability to perceive their existence is conditional on you passing the second and third barriers.
There's 3?
Each more daunting than the last.
Atul Gawande, the author of the Checklist Manifesto, provides case studies and many different examples from many large companies like Boeing and Johns Hopkins that operate as complex systems, and how they have incorporated standard work to ensure all the processes are completed properly. He goes on to say that medicine has become the art of managing extreme complexity, and a test of whether such complexity can, in fact, be humanly mastered. Under conditions of complexity, not only is standard work helpful, but required for success. Physicians cannot focus on all of the things. They have to be able to focus on the most important things. Even the best and brightest of humanity can only take in and process a few things at a time. One of the best definitions I've ever heard about standard work is that standard work is created and utilized so that you can have a conversation about the work. If there is no standard work, no documentation, or no process, how can you talk about the work? It's much more effective in creating common ground so your team can discuss the work in a meaningful way. And though standard work can be constructed for just about anything, there are a few key elements to consider when first creating your standard work. People doing the work create the standard work. Sheldon knows what he wants out of a roommate, so he's the one who created the standard work. Ensuring the experts are involved in the creation of standard work is critical to a good outcome. Test before use. Though we don't see it in the episode, I imagine that Sheldon would run several tests in order to make sure that the questions he's asking and the roommate agreement he sets up are appropriately getting at his needs. He would leverage several plan, do, study, act cycles to validate that his standard is the best way to do this task. Launched locally, Sheldon was simply using the standard for himself, so this step wasn't really critical for him. But in your areas, it's important to limit the standard work to 1 or 2 areas to capture the best practices before spreading. Spread when ready. Every area might be slightly different. Make sure that you're ready to spread the standard work documentation before jumping in. Continuously improve the standard. Iteration is going to be your most important key for your area. This will ensure that your standard work actually reflects best practice. Outside of these key points, you can also use this process when developing your standard work. Pause here to take a closer look.
You said on the phone that your area of study is physics.
Yeah, experimental physics. What is that?
Doesn't concern you. You'll be going to the university every day?
Yes.
And you have a vehicle?
A car, yeah.
And you'd be willing to drive me?
Well, can't you drive?
I can. I choose not to.
Okay, suppose I could drive you. Well, that's a point in my favor, right?
Why don't you let me do this?
Come on, I just asked.
Last question. In a post-apocalyptic world, which task would you assign the highest priority? Locating a sustainable food source, reestablishing a functioning government, procreating, or preserving the knowledge of mankind?
I'm gonna go with preserving the knowledge.
That's correct.
You can see that while Leonard is going through this process, Sheldon has thought through his ideal roommate down to the last detail. He has 3 barriers of questions, and though each set gets weirder than the last, these are a part of his work sequence. Here's an image of what I imagine would be on Sheldon's clipboard while he walks through his standard work. You can see the work sequence outlined with the different important steps, key points, reasons why, and cycle time. One of my mentors used to tell me that there were only 3 types of problems in the world. First, the standard doesn't exist. Second, the standard isn't equal to the actual process. And third, the standard has waste.
According to the roommate agreement, I'm entitled to allocate 50% of the cubic footage of the common areas.
But you didn't notify me by email, so this is still a breach.
I did notify you.
Oh, you did you? Rat. Hoisted by my own spam filter.
What am I doing in your spam folder?
I put you there after you forwarded me a picture of a cat playing the piano entitled "This is Funny."
Oh, yeah, I saw that. That was hilarious.
In this moment, Sheldon was frustrated because he thought that Leonard hadn't followed the standard. However, Leonard actually had followed the process, and it was a mistake on Sheldon's part for allowing Leonard's email to go into his spam folder. I would say that this is a prime example of the standard having waste. First of all, Sheldon is asking for an email request to add furniture to the room when talking about it would have sufficed. Or, I don't know, maybe he could allow Leonard to make some stinking decisions? Second of all, there was a process deviation on Sheldon's part by putting Leonard's email into the spam folder. Both of these point to waste in the standard work of their roommate agreement. One of the main concerns I hear about utilizing standard work in a healthcare setting is why on earth would I use standard work when our patients are so unique? This is a very valid question, so let me paint a picture. A patient walks into their primary care office because they're having severe dizziness. With standard work available, the patient filled out a questionnaire prior to the appointment, and the physician would have access to some standard workflows to determine the best imaging option. Now, how hard would it be to respond to a vague symptom like dizziness without some standard work? Do they need labs? Do they need imaging? What questions would you even ask the patient? Dizziness is a symptom of so many things. We need standard work to reduce variation and to allow care teams to focus on unique patient needs. Remember that comment I made earlier about how standard work is used to have a conversation about the work? Well, here's where that concept becomes particularly critical. If we had no standard work while operating on a patient, if something went wrong, how would we be able to pinpoint the problem? Or if you want to look at it from a positive note, say that your patient had incredible outcomes and you want to refer back to how the procedure went in order to attempt to do it again the same way the next time. How would you be able to work with your team and talk about the work in order to improve without a standard? The truth is that it would be difficult and our outcomes would vary wildly. It's important to note that we don't want everything to be standard all of the time. One important question to ask is what really needs to be consistent and what level of detail is needed to be consistent. We should only have standard work where necessary. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague Elise Scoggins to provide her thoughts on standard work.
Standard work is important because it creates an ideal process. It maps things out step by step, so we're able to really understand how we want our ideal state to work and how we get there. It doesn't become person dependent. It allows basically anybody in any position, for the most part, to really be able to work through the steps and have that same desired outcome. And also, if we aren't meeting our desired outcome, it allows us an opportunity to really figure out where the process is breaking down and fix the process overall to get to our desired end state. A good example of that is when we think of our code carts or emergency carts. We have standard sets of supplies, instruments, and equipment that are always stocked and readily available should we need to pull those carts in an emergency. We have standard processes that check those carts on a daily basis, a visual indication system that lets our staff know if the cart has been opened. And so by doing that, we're able to then not worry about that we don't have what we need should an emergency arrive, but fully focus our attention on the life-saving measures for the patient. So standard work will never be a one-size-fits-all. We're never going to have a set of standard work that will be universal across all of our services or all of our departments. What we can hope and focus in on is where do we have that commonality? And then really embrace that flexibility. So as we're working through standard work within the interventional platform at Stanford, we know that we won't have the same set of standard work for all of the service lines that we support. And we want to embrace those differences. We want staff to feel like their voices are heard and the complexity of those patients.
Standard work is more necessary than ever in a complex system like healthcare, as it allows for the frontline staff to focus on the most important things. Yes, every patient is different, but often standard work can be helpful in recreating a good outcome or avoiding a bad one. We use standard work to have a conversation about the work. Standard work is something we use every day and can be incredibly helpful to our work. I hope that this video gave you the tools you need to start utilizing standard work in your areas. Live long and prosper.